In 1943, 70% of every bulldozer, scraper, and earth mover used by the Allied forces in World War II came from one company, not General Motors, not Caterpillar, not any name you'd recognize from a highway construction site today. It came from a sixth-grade dropout from Vermont who broke his neck in a race car, nearly died of the Spanish flu, and gave away 90% of everything he ever earned. His name was R.G. LeTourneau, and almost nobody remembers him. So, the early 20th century. America is building itself from the ground up. Roads, dams, levees, irrigation channels, highways connecting cities that barely had electricity. And the way you moved dirt in 1920 is essentially the same way you moved it in 1820. Men with shovels, mules dragging scrapers. Maybe if you had real money, a steam-powered tractor pulling something crude through the mud on steel wheels that sank into anything softer than packed gravel. The entire process was brutal, slow, and astonishingly expensive. A mile of road could take a small army of laborers several weeks. A levee project could consume an entire building season and still come in behind schedule. The machines, such as they were, broke constantly. They were heavy, dumb, and designed with all the elegance of a medieval siege weapon. The earth-moving industry in America was waiting for someone to drag it into the modern age. It did not know this. The industry was perfectly content being terrible. Into this world walks Robert Gilmore LeTourneau, born November 30th, 1888, in Richford, Vermont. Fourth of 8 children in a devout Plymouth Brethren family. His 2 sisters would become missionaries to China. Bob was not the missionary type, not yet. He later described himself as both the biggest and the dumbest kid in his class, which was probably an exaggeration, but he leaned into it. At 14, standing 6 feet tall and weighing 160 pounds, he quit school and walked into the East Portland Iron Works to start an apprenticeship as a molder. His father was deeply unhappy. Bob did not seem especially concerned. Then the foundry burned down, so he moved on, worked at other foundries, ended up in San Francisco right around the time of the 1906 earthquake, made money selling photographs of the destruction, which tells you something about the man's instinct for opportunity even at 17. During the rebuilding, someone put a welding torch in his hands. It became, in his words, his favorite tool for the rest of his life. After that, he pulled stumps, mined for gold, cleared farmland, cut timber, worked at the Yerba Buena power plant, where he learned about applying electricity to industrial machinery, a skill that would later prove to be worth billions. He injured himself badly with an axe, and while laid up recovering, took a correspondence course in auto mechanics. He never completed the assignments or paid for the credits, but he learned everything he needed. He later granted himself what he called a Bachelor of Motorcycles after taking apart and reassembling his own motorcycle in a single day. He opened a garage in Stockton, California around 1911, became half-owner of the Superior Garage, fixed Regal cars, became an excellent mechanic with a total understanding of the combustion engine. Then, because apparently near-death experiences were just a casual hobby for him, he fixed up an old Buick race car, challenged a friend to a publicity stunt, crashed it at speed, and broke his neck. Actually broke it. The doctors at the hospital rigged up a rope contraption that was, in LeTourneau's words, first cousin to a hangman's noose. It didn't work. No matter how they lashed his body to the bed, they'd find him in the morning with his head flopped sideways on his shoulder. One doctor observed that he looked like a chicken trying to put its head under its wing if he had enough neck. He spent months recovering at a friend's house, his head at an odd angle, reading about machines and thinking about what to build next. The broken neck would follow him his entire life. It kept him out of World War I entirely. Instead, he worked at the Mare Island Navy Yard in California as a maintenance assistant, where he was trained as an electrical machinist and refined his welding skills further. He survived the 1918 influenza pandemic, which killed roughly 50 million people worldwide. After the war, he returned to Stockton, discovered his garage business had completely failed in his absence, and needed to pay off his share of the debts. A tractor dealer he'd done work for asked him to look at a broken Holt 75 crawler owned by a big local rancher. LeTourneau fixed it. The skeptical rancher told him to go level a 40-acre field with the tractor and a worn-out scraper. If the Holt was still running at the end, the rancher would pay the repair bill plus $1 an hour for labor. First, though, LeTourneau had to rebuild the scraper itself, which was barely functional. He rebuilt it, leveled the field. The Holt survived. And something fundamental shifted. He said it later with a simplicity that understates everything that followed. I wanted to move dirt, lots of dirt. That one sentence changed the construction industry for the next 100 years. In January of 1920, he bought a used Holt tractor and a rented scraper and started a land-leveling business. By May of 1921, he had a small workshop in Stockton where he began designing and building his own scrapers from scratch. The machines available on the market were inadequate, heavy, slow, fragile where they should have been strong, rigid where they should have flexed, designed by people who apparently had never spent a full day behind one in actual working conditions. LeTourneau looked at every piece of earth-moving equipment he could find, and where everyone else saw finished products, he saw problems, opportunities, things accepted as permanent limitations that were actually just failures of imagination. He built the first all-welded scraper with electrically controlled blades. This was radical. The entire heavy equipment industry relied on riveted construction, the same technique used on bridges and warships. LeTourneau welded everything. His personal rule was absolute and non-negotiable. Never use a bolt where a weld would do. The industry thought he was insane. Welded joints on heavy equipment would crack under stress. They would fail catastrophically. They would get someone killed. LeTourneau welded them anyway. His equipment turned out lighter, stronger, faster to manufacture, and far cheaper to repair. A welded frame distributes stress across the entire connection surface. A rivet concentrates force at discrete points around a hole drilled through the structural member, which is exactly where you do not want concentrated force. His competitors spent the next 20 years figuring out what he demonstrated with a torch in a Stockton workshop. In 1922, after selling several modified scrapers to other contractors, he found himself with a big earth-moving contract and no scraper of his own, not a single new one available for purchase anywhere in California. So he grabbed his welding torch, raided his scrap pile, and built a machine from salvaged metal that outperformed everything else on the market. That moment, building a superior machine from scrap because nothing better existed, was the real founding of what became R.G. LeTourneau, Incorporated, formally organized in 1929. Through the 20s and early 30s, LeTourneau completed major earth-moving projects including the Boulder Highway to Hoover Dam in Nevada, the Marysville Levees, the Orange County Dam, and the Newhall Cutoff in California. 6 companies incorporated, the consortium that built Hoover Dam, later gave him a formal appreciation award for the earth-moving equipment he supplied to the Boulder Dam project. His reputation grew with every contract. Then came 1932. A customer complained that his steel-wheeled scraper kept sinking in sandy soil. Steel wheels were the universal standard on heavy equipment. Had been for decades. Nobody questioned it. LeTourneau's answer was to put rubber tires on a scraper. The tire companies thought he had genuinely lost his mind. Nobody manufactured low-pressure, heavy-duty rubber tires large enough for earth-moving equipment, because nobody had ever needed them, because nobody had ever been crazy enough to put rubber tires on a machine that weighed several tons and dragged through abrasive soil all day. LeTourneau designed his own rim and bead features, patented them, paid for the tire molds himself out of his own pocket. then took the designs to the reluctant tire manufacturers and essentially forced their hand. "Make me the tires I need. Use these molds." They did, grudgingly. The rubber tires worked spectacularly well. Equipment stopped sinking in soft ground. It could travel on paved roads between job sites instead of being loaded on flatbed trailers and hauled at enormous expense. It was faster in every condition, more fuel efficient, because the rolling resistance of rubber on soil is a fraction of what steel wheels produce. All that energy previously wasted grinding metal into dirt was now moving earth. Sales for 1934 nearly tripled the previous year. Within a decade, every equipment manufacturer in the world had abandoned steel wheels for rubber. LeTourneau had already moved on. He quit contracting entirely in 1933 to focus on manufacturing, moved operations to Peoria, Illinois, to be near Caterpillar, since contractors used cat tractors to pull his scrapers. Built a factory on 23 acres on the north side of the city. Sales exploded despite the Depression. Added a plant in Toccoa, Georgia in 38, Australia in 41, Vicksburg, Mississippi in 42, Longview, Texas in 45. The company was growing faster than anyone could track. Then came the car accident of 1937, full-body cast, 6 months of enforced immobility. Most people would have rested. LeTourneau designed a stretcher on wheels so he could be rolled through his factory while flat on his back. And lying there, unable to move anything below his neck, he designed the machine that would fundamentally reshape the earth-moving industry, the Tournapull. Here's the problem he was solving. His rubber-tired scrapers were fast, dramatically faster than anything the industry had ever seen, but they were still being pulled by tracked Caterpillar tractors that maxed out at roughly 5 miles per hour on a good day. The entire earth-moving system was bottlenecked by the slowest link in the chain. The solution, obvious to LeTourneau if to nobody else, was to eliminate the tracked tractor completely. Build a 2-wheeled, rubber-tired power unit fast enough to match the scraper's potential. He designed it lying in that body cast. 2 massive rubber tires, a big diesel engine jutting out in front, a driver's seat perched on top, electric push-button controls instead of the mechanical levers and cable linkages that required serious physical strength to operate. The whole machine looked absurd. "Like a sulky without a horse," one observer said. When he was mobile again, LeTourneau took the design to Caterpillar and asked them to build the 2-wheeled tractor portion. Caterpillar examined the plans carefully and refused, completely. The concept was ridiculous. It defied basic engineering sense. Nobody would buy it. Nobody wanted it. So LeTourneau built it himself. Powerful electric motors in the wheel hubs, push-button controls for every function. When you hitched a Tournapull in front of a LeTourneau carry-all scraper, the combination moved a full load at 15 miles per hour and returned empty at 20. That was 3 to 4 times the speed of any tracked system on Earth. The construction industry had simply never seen anything operate at those speeds while moving Earth. "Called crazy again," LeTourneau said later. "I knew I was on the right track." He was right. The ridiculous-looking Tournapull was an immediate commercial success. So was the Tournadozer, a 4-wheeled, rubber-tired bulldozer built on identical principles. Within 20 years, Caterpillar and every single major competitor in the earth-moving industry had adopted the same fundamental design that Caterpillar had flat-out refused to build. The company that said no ended up copying the homework. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. We cover stuff like this every week. Okay, back to it. Now, the technical depth on what made LeTourneau's approach genuinely different and why it mattered so much when the entire world went to war. The core innovation was not any single machine. It was a complete rethinking of how earth-moving should work. LeTourneau believed construction equipment needed to be fast, versatile, mechanized, and operated by the smallest crew possible. The contrast with previous methods was staggering. During World War I, roughly 1,000 men with shovels did the work that a single LeTourneau bulldozer could do alone. One machine, one operator, replacing 1,000 laborers. That ratio is not rhetorical exaggeration. That was the actual calculation the U.S. military made when evaluating his equipment for wartime procurement. His scraper designs were transformative because they unified 4 previously separate operations into one machine run by one person. Load, haul, dump, spread. Before LeTourneau, each of those was an independent task requiring its own equipment and its own crew. He collapsed the entire earth-moving cycle into a single continuous operation. One pass, one machine, one operator moving dirt from cut to fill without stopping. The electric drive system in the Tournapull deserves special attention because it was decades ahead of every competitor. Each driving wheel contained its own electric traction motor, powered by a central diesel-driven generator. This was fundamentally the same principle used in diesel-electric locomotives, scaled down and adapted for construction equipment. There were no drive shafts to snap, no differentials to seize, no conventional transmission to strip under load. Each wheel operated completely independently. If one wheel hit soft ground or lost traction, the others compensated automatically without any mechanical intervention. The system was inherently simpler than any mechanical drivetrain of comparable power output. Fewer moving parts means fewer failure points, and critically, the diesel-electric architecture was infinitely scalable. LeTourneau could make machines as large as physics and tire technology allowed, without ever hitting the torque limitations of mechanical gearboxes and drive components. No gear set manufactured at the time could handle the forces his larger designs demanded. The electric system just needed bigger generators and bigger wheel motors. Problem solved. The push-button electric controls were a quiet revolution of their own. An operator running a 20-ton scraper with fingertip pressure on a button panel instead of wrestling mechanical levers and cable linkages that demanded serious upper body strength and endurance. This reduced operator fatigue dramatically, which translated directly into fewer accidents, longer productive shifts, and more consistent earth-moving output over a full working day. It also expanded the potential operator pool significantly. You no longer needed to be physically powerful to run LeTourneau equipment. You needed to be skilled and attentive. When World War II erupted, the Allies needed infrastructure everywhere, immediately, under impossible conditions. Roads across the deserts of North Africa for Rommel's pursuers, airstrips hacked out of Pacific Island jungles, supply depots and staging areas across southern England for the invasion of France, bases in Australia, Burma, India, the Alaska Highway, 1,500 miles of road carved through Canadian wilderness. More than half of the Alcan was built using LeTourneau equipment alone. Military historians later described the Allied construction effort as the greatest dirt-moving project the world had ever seen. More earth was displaced during the Second World War than during every previous war in recorded human history. Combined. LeTourneau's 5 factories shifted to wartime production and stayed at maximum output for years. Between 1942 and 45, the numbers were staggering: roughly 8,000 scrapers, 14,000 bulldozer blades, 1,600 sheepfoot rollers for compacting soil, 1,200 rooters for clearing vegetation and stumps, 1,800 Tournapulls. During the war years alone, his engineering team filed 78 separate inventions. Patents were accumulating while the world was on fire. Production volume was only half the story. Speed was the other half, and arguably the more important one. A LeTourneau scraper crew could grade and compact a functional airstrip out of raw jungle in a matter of hours, not days. Hours. In the Pacific Island hopping campaign, the time between capturing an island and having operational aircraft on it directly determined air superiority in the next engagement. You take an island, the enemy still has planes on nearby islands. You need your own fighters there immediately. That means runways, taxiways, revetments, fuel pads, ammunition storage, all cut from jungle, coral, or volcanic rock by LeTourneau equipment being unloaded from landing craft while the shooting was still going on around the perimeter. The military understood the strategic value of this equipment perfectly. By the mid-1940s, between 50 and 75% of all Allied earth-moving machines bore the LeTourneau name. No single manufacturer in any industry had ever dominated military logistics to that degree, before or since. So that was the peak. 299 patents over a lifetime, 5 manufacturing plants across 3 continents, 70% market share in military earthmoving. Over 6,000 employees, recognition from the construction industry, the military, and the government. A reporter asked LeTourneau how many men he had working for him. His answer was classic. Oh, I'd say about half of them. And then, in 1953, at the absolute height of his dominance, LeTourneau sold everything: the scrapers, the dozers, the Tournapull, 3 of his 5 factories, including the original Peoria plant, all inventory, all machinery, all patents related to the earth-moving line. Everything went to the Westinghouse Airbrake Company for $31 million. He signed a 5-year non-compete clause that barred him from building earth-moving equipment until 1958. The reasons were layered. Westinghouse was desperate to diversify out of the railroad equipment business, and the predicted highway construction boom made earth-moving irresistible. They offered a number that was very hard to refuse, but LeTourneau had his own motivations. He was obsessed with the electric wheel, a hub motor concept he had been perfecting where the entire traction motor lived inside the wheel itself, eliminating every component between the engine and the ground. He believed it would make all existing drivetrains obsolete. He wanted to pursue it with total focus. And there was his faith. He and his wife Evelyn had been giving away increasingly staggering portions of their wealth. 90% of company stock, 90% of personal income, donated to the LeTourneau Foundation for Christian Missions in Africa, South America, and worldwide evangelism. They lived on the remaining 10%. When his wife first suggested giving half, LeTourneau agreed. Then she said that still left an awful lot. They kept going until the split was 90-10, with the 10 being what they kept. With 2 remaining factories and the non-compete ticking down, LeTourneau built logging machines, tree crushers, jungle clearing equipment, prefabricated steel homes for his workers, and then his masterpiece of audacity: the world's first mobile offshore jack-up drilling platform. He called it the Scorpion. His customer was a young Texas oil man named George Herbert Walker Bush. The deal was pure LeTourneau. He proposed to Bush's Zapata Offshore Company that he would build a $3 million, 9 million pound drilling platform standing on 3 retractable legs, each 140 feet long, entirely at his own expense. If it worked, Zapata would pay. If it failed, LeTourneau would absorb the entire cost. Bush wrote in his autobiography that anyone with that kind of confidence in himself was worth the gamble. The Scorpion was fabricated at the Vicksburg plant, measured 186 feet long by 150 feet wide, and walked itself to the Mississippi River under its own power. It was christened at Pier 12 in Galveston on March 20th, 1956. It didn't work. Not at first. The jacking system failed. Gulf saltwater seeped into the gearboxes. Bush described watching with growing concern as his investment appeared to be sinking, but LeTourneau was a man accustomed to temporary setbacks. He went out to the platform, examined the legs, studied the rack and pinion gears, pulled a piece of chalk out of his pocket, and sketched corrections directly onto the steel deck. No engineering drawings, no slide rule, no calculations on paper, just a 6th grade dropout with a piece of chalk drawing on steel while experienced engineers watched in disbelief. Welders followed his marks. Within a month, the Scorpion was operational and drilling oil. Bush was so impressed, he ordered a second platform, the Vinegaroon, which later became the only offshore rig on the Gulf Coast to survive Hurricane Audrey, completely undamaged. By 1970, the LeTourneau name was on more than half the drilling platforms operating in the world's oceans. He also built land trains for the Arctic, massive diesel-electric vehicles with 10-foot diameter tires, hauling hundreds of tons of supplies across the frozen tundra to build radar stations along the distant early warning line. The snow buggy alone was the longest off-road vehicle ever built at the time, and he built the LT360, the largest motor scraper ever constructed, 200 feet long, over 5,000 combined horsepower from 8 diesel engines, 8 tires, each over 10 feet in diameter. It performed flawlessly on the proving ground. Nobody bought one. Was it too big? Not in Mr. LeTourneau's mind, his engineers noted. The single prototype was eventually cannibalized to build other machines. When the non-compete expired in 1958, LeTourneau re-entered the earth-moving business. He was 70 years old. He designed electric wheel drive haulers that could carry 360 tons. He kept showing up to his modest office every single day, drawing machines at his drafting table until a stroke in March of 1969 ended his working life. He died on June 1st at the age of 80. His gravestone on the campus of LeTourneau University in Longview reads simply, "Mover of men and mountains." The fall is not about the man. He went out still inventing, still drawing, still thinking bigger. The fall is about what happened to everything he built. The company was sold to Marathon Manufacturing in 1970, just a year after his death, renamed Marathon LeTourneau. Then Rowan Companies acquired it in '86. Joy Global bought it in 2011. Komatsu swallowed Joy Global in 2016. Each transaction diluted the name further. The Westinghouse side fared no better. Absorbed into American Standard in '68, sold to Dresser Industries in '84. The original Peoria factory LeTourneau, built in 1935, still operates today. Under the Komatsu name, his machines are on every construction site on Earth. His name is on almost none of them. Today, every rubber-tired scraper on every job site in the world uses principles Robert LeTourneau invented. His hub motor patent from 1950 is the direct ancestor of the electric wheel motors in modern electric vehicles. His diesel-electric drivetrain concept runs in every locomotive and every mining haul truck over 200 tons. His offshore platform design created a global industry worth hundreds of billions. LeTourneau University in Longview, Texas, still produces engineers and aeronautical scientists. His 12-foot bronze statue stands in Glen Oak Park in Peoria, Illinois, dedicated in 1988 by nearly 1,000 people who still remembered what the man had done. 2 years before he died, LeTourneau recorded a prediction. "Construction machinery will grow bigger and bigger," he said. "Hundreds of tons of capacity, thousands of horsepower. And when contractors come looking for bigger equipment, I'm going to be right there, the firstest with the mostest." He was right about the machines. They did get bigger. They did reach thousands of horsepower. He was just wrong about being there to build them. The machines outgrew the man's lifetime, but not his ideas. Every massive hauler in every open-pit mine in the world is, in some meaningful way, a machine R.G. LeTourneau predicted and helped make possible. He moved 70% of the earth that won a world war, changed half a dozen industries, gave away nearly everything he owned, and the world mostly forgot his name. And there you have it, R.G. LeTourneau, the man who moved the earth and nearly vanished from history. If you've seen one of his machines, or you've been to the university, or you know something I missed, drop it in the comments. And if you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe. We do this every week.